Give a big hand for the race committee for the great job they did today for everybody. Get all the races in. Second, give a bigger round of applause for all the bar and kitchen staff, for all the food and drinks for everybody, everything they do. They're the reason that makes this whole regatta series special, in my opinion, how welcoming this club is and all of us being here. So thank you to Davis Island Yacht Club and all the staff and everybody. Okay, so we have Bryce and Travis with us here today. I think they're winning the day, is that correct? Yeah. And Thomas Barrows, who's out here as well. He's coming back. But we have a couple of questions for them. So we'll first start with Travis. So you guys had a really good day. You didn't win any races, but you were very consistent. So just tell us about your strategy and how you managed today, which was really difficult. Everybody hear me? Oh God, I hate my voice. All right. So, yeah, today we were pretty consistent. The one thing I talked to the team about was, like, let's not take any massive numbers. You know, if we can stay in the top 10, it might look good at the end of the day. This venue in particular, it's really hard to get off the starting line. But more than worrying about a really good start is my clean lane after the start. So if I have a bad start, how quick can I get clean? We did a really good job. Bryce had a great first start today, and then after that, we kind of battled to get a clean lane. And the biggest thing for us was staying in the pressure and keeping the boat fully powered up the whole day. So I think that was kind of our game plan. So for all the drivers out there, how hard of a day was it? Horrible, right? Exactly. But Bryce did a great job. You guys really sailed well. So give a couple tips to your fellow drivers who suffered out there with you today. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so tips for driving. I think today was a lot of telltale sailing, so very focused on keeping the telltale streaming. When it's light and variable, I mean, if you get a little high, you really get punished. So trying to keep telltales flowing back. And yeah, a lot of communication with the tactician and the trimmer, making sure everyone's happy with the sail trim, keeping the boat fast and so that was a big focus for me today. Telltales were big.
Thomas sails on the Savasana. They had a really good day as well. And my question to you guys won the races, didn't have the best start, tough first beat, but clawed right through the fleet. So when you're in those positions, kind of what is your thought process? How do you work your way up and get through everybody?
All right. I think the biggest thing on the first beat, the fleet's really congested, so a lot of it's fleet management coming into the top mark. So once you get, I'd say, 7/8 of the way up the beat, you sort of need to hedge to whatever side you think will have the last big feature, and then maybe be willing to sail through a couple shifts to get to that side. But prior to that, it's important to just stay in phase, and even if you have a thin lane, just keep on plugging away, because if you stay in phase and hit the shifts at the right angle, you start gaining a lot. But at a certain point, you know, like if we play these two shifts, we're just going to be in really bad air. So sometimes it's a little bit of a calculus of, okay, we just play through these two shifts to have better lanes. So trying to balance that, playing the shifts versus lane management. And then the downwinds are huge opportunities here. So, and today was tricky because if you jibed early, you had to sail through a big hole, and it was unclear if a big righty was coming or not. So trying to balance that on the downwinds, but the downwinds and then coming around the gate.
Question. Go for it. So, Thomas, you're talking about staying in phase. Can you talk about? Sorry. No, you got it. You gotta hold the button up.
I just yelled.
My question was for Thomas, who just got done talking about kind of staying in phase, and I was hoping you could elaborate on staying in phase with wind shifts versus course geometry and kind of pointing towards the mark, because they're not always the same thing. Like sometimes you're getting out to the left side and you're getting lifted on starboard and you're on the lift, but the mark is behind your back. So how do you sort of weigh that and try not to be in that position earlier on?
Yeah, so, I think that comes back to the fleet management. So if it's mostly port tack coming back, you might be a little bit more willing to tack early on the shift to stay in phase, or, I guess that's very specific, but it's like balancing the fleet with knowing where you can ride the pressure, and also how streaky it is. Like sometimes today you just had to sail to the pressure, other times the pressure came down to you. So good communication on the boat about if the breeze is coming down or if it's more streaky. And then I'd say in general though, here it's more emphasis on your angle going upwind versus course geometry. Like the oscillations sometimes would last, they would be pretty quick at the top. So talking about that, like, is there enough time for the shift to come back? But sometimes like the shift wasn't going to come back, so you just had to go. So talking about the frequency of the oscillations is a big component of that.
So one of the things from the coach boat, at least watching the races for the first time in a long time, is the approach to both the windward mark and the gate were crucial, as well as the exit from the gate. I'm going to throw this to Travis a little bit, but you guys did a good job of getting into the windward mark cleanly and getting out of there. And the same thing with the gate. So when you're approaching those marks, because especially when you're not in the first 2-3 boats, it's congested, right? It's really crowded. So what do you think about when you're approaching those marks, and how you pre-plan other than the last 4 boat lengths when you're coming into that?
All right, here we go. So I had Ian Coleman on the boat today trimming, and a lot of the times I was kind of head in the boat with Bryce, and he did a really good job at explaining what was coming to us and breeze and everything like that. But one thing I noticed, like, we weren't in great positions in the first quarter to half of the beat. But like I said before, we want to be in a good lane, so we get to a good lane, get lifted, and get on some good pressure and go. And as far as we could. And one of the things I noticed is the boats ahead of us would all start playing with each other and trying to sail the shortest distance to the mark, which is normally how I love to do it, but here sometimes that doesn't work out. So they'd get in a cluster. So my approach was to be in clean air, which sometimes made me overstand on the right side. Out kind of top right, I would overstand and let everybody fight. There was a little bit of current coming at us, I felt, or it kind of felt weird up there to actually make the mark if you had a thin ley line. So I overstood, stayed in really clean lanes, and also understanding that the boat in front of me, if a boat in front of me tacked on ley line, that's my blocker. So they're probably going to force any boat that's ahead of us to tack soon. So I just go a little further, stay in clean air. Yeah, I was overstood a little bit, which is something I don't like to do, but I had pressure the whole time, and as soon as the other boats would get in clumps, they would kind of stop. So we kind of passed people at those weather marks. And for the leeward gate, the biggest thing is the exit of the gate for us. So Bryce did a really good job at going wide and tight, and really having to sail that down speed, pinchy upwind for the first 3 to 5 minutes of that out of the gate. And that seemed, you just had to be really patient. You couldn't tack right away because you're going to go into all the kites and maybe the boat's coming from the other side of the gate. So we just stayed there for 3 to 5 minutes, let things clear out. Davis Island you have to be super patient here with everything you do, which is not how I ever sail.
Not how you do anything.
Ever. So I'm just talking to myself, stay patient, it'll come. Thomas said a really cool thing about knowing when to tack, knowing when to go on the next tack, or just staying patient about this. And I think that that's a big proponent of this place to sail here. So stay patient, stay in the breeze, and when you're going to those weather marks, just, I don't know, being clear no matter what it takes.
So for Bryce, I'm going to throw one question to you. So I think the one thing that's really important is drivers who communicate well with who they're sailing with. And I think it's really easy for drivers all around to get silent or get talked to all the time. But being able to talk, I'm not saying talk back, but relay kind of feelings you have or things you're thinking, or able to communicate your position to the team is important. So a couple things that you talk about with Travis or Ian or whoever on the boat that you think is important that helps you as a driver do a better job.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something we actually talked about yesterday quite a bit with our team, and it's I mean, as a driver, you have kind of the most feeling of the boat because you have the tiller. You're sitting on your butt all the time. You're kind of feeling everything immediately. So intrinsically, you kind of have a lot of feeling in the boat. And what I think is super valuable as a driver is just providing just feedback to the team. So it's like it feels like there's a header coming maybe, but just by looking at the telltales because you're kind of staring at the telltales all the time. Or kind of feels like we're overheeled, the boat feels sticky, and just any feedback I think to the team, and then they can take that and with their respective positions say like, okay, he says the boat feels sticky, so maybe we need to try and adjust some things. But I think just being more vocal than you think as a driver is super valuable because all that feedback is just data that the team can take, and then as we go through trim and all this kind of things, they can take that information and make quick adjustments because surely as a driver, you have like a lot of feel in the boat. So take advantage of that, just be vocal, even if it's not right. I've found that providing more information than not is super helpful for the team.
Does anybody have any specific questions for these guys before I get to the last question? Go for it. So the question is, what was the boat speed upwind on the instruments on the boat when people either were hiking or were not hiking?
I stared at it a lot today. So when I was off the rail, everybody off the rail, I saw as low as 3-4 sometimes, maybe 4 knots. And then as soon as everybody could get up on the rail, we were probably 4.8 to 5 knots. But rarely were we ever legs over. So when you're not hiking, I feel like it's really hard to go over 5 knots. So I saw a lot of 4.4s and 4.8s. And I don't know, that last race I saw 3-4 a couple of times. But there's a funny thing. I was talking to the team about this. When it's really light, there is a point where you do want to heel the boat, probably 8 degrees, 9 degrees. And then there's a point where it's really light, like everybody's in the leeward, where I think then you have to transition to maybe becoming a little bit flatter than you would actually ever want to. It doesn't feel good or anything, but I watched us go from like 4.2, and then I sat up on the boat, and the boat was uncomfortably flat, and it went right to 4.8. And I would say it's right in that 5 knot or under range where that happens, that you have to be flatter than the feel is actually good for. So.
Yeah, I would say the angle of heel is the most important component that I look at in the light air going upwind. And you need to somewhat tailor it to if you're getting lifting pressure, when do you heel the boat to help it turn. But I think going upwind in light air, you oftentimes to accelerate, the boat needs to be at like 6 degrees, 7 degrees angle of heel. And then a good happy medium, if the boat's like at speed, is 8 or 9. And then once it starts to get windier, the boat it has enough flow over the foils where it can heel a little bit more. But for sure, like the first move if the boat's down speed, once it gets light, is like go to 5 or 6 degrees of angle of heel. Then once the boat gets up to speed, you can trim on the sails harder and then let it ride. I think that's a good thing to look at.
So the question was about the downwind and how you guys manage that and the boat speed. So go for it.
Downwind, we talked about speed more than upwind. Downwind, when the pressure was somewhat solid, 5 knots was a good benchmark. Like sometimes you could get down to 4.8, we thought. And then angle feels pretty critical there. But it's more dynamic. If you need to speed bill, 4 degrees was good to touch on. A good neutral number was 1. If you ever got to 3 and you felt like there was good pressure on the kite and the boat was going fast, that was too much. And then the tricky part about today is like if pressure's coming from behind and you're headed and slow. Meeting the pressure with a flat boat was really critical. So the boat's down speed, and constantly as a driver, you're like, boat's down speed, I need to head up, right? But if you're down speed because you're in a lull, but then you get headed pressure and you head up, the boat almost staggers and doesn't actually accelerate forward. So it's a counterintuitive. You need to sail the boat flat and let the boat accelerate when the pressure hits you and not head up, because that will actually like load the boat up more. So, and as well as upwind, I think just talking about the next transition really helps the drivers know, okay, do I err on the high side or low side? So if you know pressure is coming on, you might want to start to cheat low as a driver. If you know the pressure is decreasing, start cheating up. And the same goes with upwind. Like if you're coming into lifting pressure, if you know that as a driver, you can lift the windward tail one. If you know you're nosing into a header, I think that's really huge on a day like today.
I think the one thing about the difference between upwind and downwind to remember is when you're going upwind, the boats and the wind are basically passing each other, right? So the wind's going downwind, you're going upwind. So there might be 10 shifts on a beat. But going downwind, there's 3 or 4 because you're going with the wind the whole time. So if you get in a puff, you stay in it, you get halfway down the course in the same puff. So what's interesting is you watch, Travis and Thomas and all the top teams, they come around the windward mark and they identify right away which shift they're in and how to get onto the current shift where they are immediately so they can ride it as long as they can, because they could get a third of the way down the course on that shift before the wind changes again. It passes them. So I guess like one of the things I would ask you, Travis, how do you identify you come off the windward mark if you're going to go straight or jibe? Because it's a pretty critical decision, because it may only change 3 times going downwind versus 15 going upwind or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, on deciding what we're going to do downwind really starts right before the weather mark for me. I'm pretty simple with it. Like if I'm lifted, coming in on starboard, that's my first telltale sign I'm going to hang as soon as we set. I'm not going to jibe right away. But the other thing is, between the weather mark and the offset, I'll kind of take a look around and be like, where's the biggest puff I'm going to stay in? So one of the things most of the time here you don't want to do is jibe right away and be under 60 boats, right? But sometimes you can't. If I came in on a big righty with pressure, it might still be there, and I want to jibe right away and take that all away. Today, I felt like just bearing off, going downwind, seemed to work pretty well. You seem to be kind of headed. There's something that happens up here near the club that keeps it a little pressurized off that offset mark. And so we just take that. It seemed to work for quite a while. And as the day went on, we had to jibe sooner and sooner as some of the righties started to play a part in that. But really, between the offset and the weather mark, I'm looking at where the biggest line of pressure is. And that's what's going to make my call whether or not I stay or jibe.
Does anybody else have any questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, one question, if you have that hole at the mark, but you want to jibe, I mean, how do you weigh those two issues? Because, there are the 60 boat holes. I mean, does it have to be a bigger righty for you to justify the jibe in that situation?
Yeah, for sure. And you're tracking how the breeze is trending on the upwind. Like in the second race today, the other superior team jibed early, and there were a lot more righties on that beat. So at first they sailed through a big hole, but based on how the wind was trending on that upwind, it seemed like, I thought it was a smart move, but at first I wasn't going to be the first one to do it because I was being conservative. But if you're getting more right pressure filtering down on the upwind, that's when you consider driving early and sailing through that hole more.
Well, I think the other thing that's a factor is where you are in the race, right? Generally speaking, the leaders, unless it's an absolute have to jibe set, will all set and extend. Just because you have clear air to go straight because of the Kona boats. And as you get further back in the fleet, the ability to jibe into the middle happens easier. So I think a little bit of it is position relative. If you're in the first 15 boats, unless you're laying the leeward mark, you almost have to go straight. There's just not enough wind in the middle to jibe in. And what was really amazing to me from watching from the motorboat was it's even worse at the gate when everyone is approaching. You have to come from an edge, and the importance of being able to round a gate and go straight for a minute at least is imperative. If you come off the gate and have to tack, it was like death. We were watching it on the video and photos today. You could see all the boats that tacked to the middle just got clobbered. You have to be able to go off the gate and go straight for a pretty decent amount of time until you get through all the spinnakers. Otherwise, the wind and the water was so chopped up you couldn't get through. And when you're sailing, it doesn't feel that bad, but when you see it from off the boat, it's really bad. So I think it kind of goes into your thing. The decision to jibe in or tack in from the gates is all dependent on where you are. Go ahead.
What was the crew weight of these two boats?
Crew weights.
725.
Same. 725, 730. Any other questions? Yeah, I'll figure out, he's asked where the photos and the video go. I'll figure out how to do it on Google Drive and then share it to the WhatsApp so everybody can see it. And get by boat and all the videos and all that stuff. Any other questions?
Both of those boats were the same number.
Yeah, that's a lot.
I think there's because I think sub 750 sub 750 is where you need to be.
Are we all happy? Yeah. We're all happy. I mean,
Question is, how do you plan approaching the gate, making sure you don't have bad air, getting clean exit lanes, etc.? Somebody take it.
So like a big thing early on, like 3/4 of the way down the run, if you're coming up to a line of boats and then you jibe to lead them back and you're to windward, that's just setting yourself up for disaster. So sometimes it's good to cross over and go against the grain where it's like 3/4 of the fleet's on port and you're on starboard instead of jibing and joining that train. It's good to, if there's enough room. So I think 3/4 of the way down the run typically dictates that. So if you can go on the jibe that most of the fleet isn't on, that's usually pretty powerful, but you gotta weigh that with being in the pressure and the angles.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not in the first 3 boats and you decide, okay, how am I going to get into this gate without having my kite collapse and all that? I mean, regardless of what's going on in the race course when it's light like this, especially at Davis Island out of this direction, think about trying to get your side to an edge, get your boat to an edge. You've got to come in kind of on ley line or near that way, because otherwise coming in the middle with a pack of boats, it's really hard to get out of that, and the boats on the edges are probably giving that middle section of bad air. So think about that first, first and foremost when you first jibe off your starboard jibe going downwind, that you want to be kind of on the outside of everybody depending on the shift. I mean, sometimes that goes away, but that's how I feel here. I want to be on the edges so that I never have to get into a clump of boats. Anytime, like J70s, in my opinion, are the hardest boats to sail when you're in a clump of boats, whether you're going upwind or downwind. So if you can get away and do things freely, just make a mental note of that and not get yourself into the situation that's happening. But to get out of it, just stay to the outside of those boats and it should be good. Going into the gates, it's not about racing and trying to beat the one boat that's ahead of you to the gate too. The other thing we talked about was really slowing ourselves down if we were, the third boat back or whatever. Because if everybody's going up to the gate really fast, when they go to turn in this light air, they're all going to slide sideways. So we would actually take the kite down immediately at the 3 boat length circle or even outside it, slow ourselves down, let the boats clear out, and then do our rounding, and it seemed to work for us pretty well.
Rich, be careful.
And I think both of these guys are being a little modest. Halfway down the run, they're already thinking about the next beat a little bit and saying, okay, I'm hedging towards wanting to go to the right side, maybe thinking about wanting to do X gate turn to go whichever way they want to go, and are already positioning themselves how to execute that maneuver to sail the beat halfway down the run. Like the discussion's already happening. If you're thinking about the gate 50 yards out, everyone around you've been thinking about it for the last half a leg has already got one up on you. I mean, it's already been discussed probably, or the decision's been made half a leg away for a lot of the boats around you. So I think that's a key part of it.
And that decision can be made pretty easily. Sure, maybe one mark's favored more than the other and everything, but at the end of the day, if you look around and you see the majority of the fleet on the course left side or on the course right side, and you're not the first boat going around, it may be worth just going to whatever gate doesn't go underneath all the spinnakers. Like today, I think I went to 2 unfavored gates because of that reason and made a gain because everybody else is going upwind underneath all the kites on the left-hand side. So that's happening halfway down the beat as well. I'm kind of taking a look at which way all the kites are on which side of the course. So.
And I think the one thing about the gate that everyone would agree, it's basically like a second start. You come off the gate mark, and if you're not lined up correctly, you get spit out the back, you have to tack, you go behind people. It's really quite bad, right? So last question, I'll throw it to Bryce. So when you're steering around the gate, what are the things you focus on to make sure the turn is good so you don't get yelled at, right? Because that's the whole goal. You don't want to get yelled at because Travis is going to yell at you. So how do you manage getting that turn so Travis doesn't have a meltdown, yell at you, and you actually get the turn done right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's situational for gate rounding. I mean, if there's a lot of traffic, ideally you want to go wide and tight. So you can make a lot of gains if there's even a boat ahead of you rounding and you go wide and tight, and you can kind of end up to windward of them once you're on the mark. So it's very situational, but a cue that I use a lot is wide and tight. You never want to get yourself in a situation where you don't have options in rounding and you have to round like inside another boat or super close to the mark. So wide and tight is a big cue that we use, and obviously like getting to the mark with lower density helps a lot and gives you a lot more options once you make that rounding.
All right, before we wrap this up, is there any other questions? Is Chip in here still? Any announcements for tomorrow? No announcements? Say what? Oh.
I've just been instructed by Kat to remind everybody about the parking situation tomorrow when you get here. Everybody's required to park outside the gate in the morning. We'll be there to help you out. We got 3 golf carts. We'll have people at the gate to work through it for you, but we got to keep the inside clear tomorrow so we can get all the boats pulled up. Thanks.
And if nobody has any more questions, that's it. Thanks to these guys for helping out. And don't forget to tip the bartenders when you guys are up here because they work really hard for us. And thanks again to the race committee, and see you all tomorrow.